1995, here we go. Hollywood lost over $500 million on just 15 films. I've got Stallone here with 2 disasters in the same year. I've got Costner, Demi Moore, and Kevin Smith. There's one studio executive who looked at a test screening and declared a movie would make $100 million. It made $2 million. He was off by $98 million. And one film set the actual Guinness World Record for the biggest box office loss in cinema history. Which one lost the most? Let's break it down. William Friedkin directed The French Connection. He directed The Exorcist. And in 1995, he made Jade, a film so forgettable that the only cultural reference to it is a joke in The 40-Year-Old Virgin. Paramount gave him $50 million to work with a Joe Eszterhas script starring David Caruso, who had just made the catastrophic decision to abandon the hit TV series NYPD Blue because he thought he was destined for movie stardom. You'd think the guy who made 2 of the greatest thrillers ever could pull this off. He couldn't. Jade grossed $9.8 million. That's an 80% loss on the production budget alone. Before marketing, here's what went wrong. This thing came out 3 weeks after Showgirls, another Eszterhas script. Audiences were suffering from what I can only call Eszterhas fatigue. The script was such a mess that Friedkin rewrote it extensively, and Eszterhas threatened to take his name off the project. Paramount reportedly paid him $2 to $4 million just to keep his screenwriting credit. They paid him millions to stay associated with a disaster. Friedkin later called it his favorite of all his films. Nobody else agrees. Speaking of questionable decisions, let's talk about Fair Game. Warner Brothers and producer Joel Silver looked at Cindy Crawford, the highest paid supermodel in the world, and said, yeah, she can carry a $50 million action movie. She could not. The film paired Crawford with William Baldwin and cost $50 million to produce. It made $11.5 million worldwide. That's a $38 million loss before you factor in marketing. Crawford later admitted she should have focused on who the director was instead of what kind of trailer she got. The director, Andrew Sipes, reportedly stopped speaking to the entire cast after 3 weeks of filming. Just stopped talking to them. Crawford also said Joel Silver kept asking, how much more money? Until she felt like an idiot for not taking it. She took it. Her film career ended here. Sylvester Stallone was originally attached. He dodged a bullet. Crawford didn't. John Carpenter is a horror legend. Halloween, The Thing, They Live. But Village of the Damned was what he called a contractual assignment he wasn't passionate about. Universal gave him $22 million to remake the 1960 British classic. He delivered something nobody wanted. The film grossed $9.4 million. Carpenter later admitted he thought it would be easy. It wasn't. Universal cut a third of the movie without his approval and rushed the release. Here's the thing that makes this one sting. This was Christopher Reeve's final theatrical film. He was paralyzed in a horse riding accident just weeks after it opened. The production itself was reportedly cursed. Locals in Point Reyes, California, allegedly shook down the crew for money and carved pentagrams into Carpenter's door. Carpenter has made peace with his lesser films. This one still doesn't come up much. This one's actually kind of sad. Strange Days had everything going for it. Catherine Bigelow directing, James Cameron producing and co-writing, Ralph Fiennes and Angela Bassett starring, a $42 million budget. This should have been a hit. It made $8 million domestically. That's one of the biggest disasters of the year from 2 of the most bankable names in Hollywood. The problem was the content. Strange Days dealt with police brutality, surveillance, and racial tension. It was directly influenced by the LA riots and the Rodney King footage. Audiences in 1995 didn't want to confront that. Bigelow herself said it should be uncomfortable to watch. It was. People stayed home. But here's where it gets interesting. The film is now considered prophetic. It predicted surveillance culture, social media's experience sharing, VR addiction. It's ranked number 141 on Letterboxd's top science fiction films. Bigelow won the Saturn Award for Best Director, the first woman ever to do so. Sometimes the audience just isn't ready. Denzel Washington made virtuosity between prestige projects, and you can tell. This was a paycheck movie dumped in August, which is Hollywood's graveyard for film studios have no confidence in. Paramount spent $30 million on a cyberpunk action film starring Washington and Russell Crowe as an AI villain. It made $24 million domestically, $37 worldwide. Not a catastrophic loss, but definitely not what anyone wanted from a Denzel Washington movie. The cyberpunk market was completely saturated in 1995. You had Johnny Mnemonic, Strange Days, Hackers, all competing for the same audience. Nobody needed another one. Crow's unhinged performance as SID 6.7 is genuinely entertaining, but it wasn't enough. Roger Ebert actually gave it 3 out of 4 stars. He was in the minority. This one's been completely forgotten. Demi Moore starred in The Scarlet Letter and delivered one of the most infamous quotes in Hollywood history. When asked about changing Nathaniel Hawthorne's ending, she reportedly said she was fine with it because not many people have read the book. The book is required reading in most American high schools. Hollywood Pictures gave this adaptation $46 million. It made $10 million. The opening credits warned audiences it was freely adapted from Hawthorne. They weren't kidding. The novel ends with confession and tragedy. The movie ends with the couple escaping happily to Carolina together. 3 different composers had their scores rejected before John Barry's was finally used. Gary Oldman was reportedly struggling with personal issues during production. Demi Moore confronted him directly about getting help. The film won the Razzie for Worst Remake and was nominated for 7 total. Roger Ebert said Hollywood had removed the character's guilt and therefore the story's drama. He was right. Columbia Pictures looked at White Men Can't Jump and thought, let's reunite Wesley Snipes and Woody Harrelson for another buddy movie. They spent $68 million on Money Train. The chemistry that made the first film work was completely absent here. It opened over Thanksgiving weekend and made $35 million domestically, $77 worldwide. That sounds acceptable until you factor in the budget and marketing. Columbia was staring at a $30 to $50 million loss. Both Siskel and Ebert put this on their worst films of 1995 lists. Gene Siskel specifically said Snipes and Harrelson had none of their previous chemistry due to the weak screenplay. The production built one of the longest movie sets ever constructed, 6/10 of a mile of subway station in Los Angeles. 85 carpenters worked 7-day weeks. 15 actual New York subway cars were shipped to LA. All that effort for a movie neither star ever mentions in career retrospectives. Tank Girl was based on Jamie Hewlett's British punk comic. Hewlett later co-created Gorillaz, so the guy knows what he's doing. MGM gave director Rachel Talalay $25 million to bring his anarchic creation to screen. They made $4 million back. The studio interfered constantly, diluting the punk spirit that made the comic special. Hewlett called it a sore point and said the script was lousy. He and his co-creator canceled the comic for a decade after the film's failure. Here's something wild. Victoria Beckham, Emma Bunton, Geri Halliwell, and Gwen Stefani all auditioned for the title role. Lori Petty got it and shaved her head for the part. Naomi Watts, pre-stardom, was so broke the casting director paid for her hair appointment out of pocket. Talalay was so embarrassed by the final product she couldn't talk about it for years. But the film found its audience. It's now a genuine cult classic with feminist and punk fans. Vinegar Syndrome released a 4K restoration in January 2026. This one's almost unbelievable. Kevin Smith won Sundance with Clerks, a film he made for $27,000. Universal gave him $6 million for his follow-up, Mallrats. The film tested phenomenally well at San Diego Comic-Con. Universal chairman Tom Pollock was so confident he declared he was there for the Animal House test screening, and this was that. He said Mallrats was going to make $100 million. It made $2.1 million. He was off by $98 million. The film was yanked from theaters within weeks. Shannon Doherty later said it ended her film career completely. She told Smith directly that people blamed her for the failure, even though she wasn't carrying the movie. But here's where it gets interesting. Mallrats became one of the greatest theatrical-to-cult classic transformations in film history. It became a massive seller on VHS. People bought it instead of renting it. Smith was an early internet adopter who built fan communities online. Stan Lee's cameo became so iconic, he referenced the film in Captain Marvel in 2019. Smith now says Mallrats had to fail so he could have an interesting career. He's probably right. William Gibson wrote Johnny Mnemonic as a short story and adapted it himself for the screen. Keanu Reeves starred fresh off the success of Speed. The original plan was a $1.5 million art film. Then Speed became a massive hit, and Sony decided to turn it into a blockbuster. The budget ballooned to $26 million. The film made $19 million. Reeves later admitted he didn't fully understand the script. His infamous "I want room service" breakdown monologue became an unintentional punchline. Here's the thing that makes this significant. When the Wachowskis pitched The Matrix to Warner Brothers, studio executives used Johnny Mnemonic as an argument against greenlighting it. They said cyberpunk doesn't work. They were proven spectacularly wrong 4 years later. A longer Japanese cut exists with a different score. The Criterion Channel now streams a black and white version closer to the director's original vision. Sometimes the compromised version is the one that gets remembered. Before The Matrix, the Wachowskis wrote Assassins. It starred Sylvester Stallone and Antonio Banderas. Richard Donner directed. Warner Brothers spent $50 million. The film made $30 million domestically, $83 worldwide. Not a complete disaster on paper, but barely breaking even after marketing. The real story is what happened behind the scenes. The Wachowskis wrote a dark, complex thriller. Donner wanted something more sympathetic and commercial. He brought in Brian Helgeland for a complete rewrite. The Wachowskis were pushed out of their own project. They later called it their abortion, their exact words. The experience made them realize they'd never survive as writers in Hollywood. So, they became directors. They made Bound in 1996. They made The Matrix in 1999. Assassins had to fail for The Matrix to exist. That's the only reason anyone remembers it now. Sylvester Stallone calls Judge Dredd his biggest mistake. He's made a lot of movies. That's saying something. Hollywood Pictures gave him $90 million to bring the iconic British comic character to screen. In over 2,000 issues of the comic, Judge Dredd's face is never clearly shown. The helmet is his identity. Stallone removes the helmet 15 minutes into the film like it's nothing. The movie made $34 million domestically, $113 worldwide. Comic fans were furious. General audiences didn't care about a character they didn't know. The film originally received an NC-17 rating, forcing last-minute cuts that canceled a planned Burger King toy tie-in. Director Danny Cannon reportedly jumped off his chair on set, screaming, "Fear me! Everyone should fear me!" Stallone said he knew they were in trouble from that moment. The 2012 Dredd with Karl Urban is now considered the definitive adaptation. Urban kept the helmet on the entire film. This is the one that set the record. Cutthroat Island cost between $92 and $115 million to produce, plus another $18 million in marketing. It made $10 million worldwide. Guinness World Records certified it as the largest box office loss in cinema history at $105 million. It held that record until Disney's John Carter in 2012. Gina Davis and director Rennie Harlin were contractually obligated to make it. Harlin later said they begged to be let go. A pirate movie with a female lead felt like career termination. They were right. Michael Douglas was originally cast but dropped out. Tom Cruise passed. Liam Neeson passed. The production was plagued with problems. A $1 million replica ship caught fire. The director fired his camera operator, and 24 crew members quit in solidarity. Carolco Pictures filed for bankruptcy 1 month before the film even opened. Cutthroat Island ended pirate movies in Hollywood for nearly a decade. It took Pirates of the Caribbean in 2003 to prove the genre could work. Showgirls was the first major studio film to receive wide release with an NC-17 rating. Paul Verhoeven directed from another Joe Esterhaas script. They'd made Basic Instinct together. MGM thought lightning would strike twice. They spent $45 million. The theatrical gross was $20 million. It won a record 7 Razzie Awards, a record that still stands. Elizabeth Berkley's career was devastated. Charlize Theron and Angelina Jolie had both turned down the role. But here's where the story gets weird. Showgirls made over $100 million on home video. It became one of MGM's top 20 best-selling DVDs ever. Verhoeven became the first director to accept his Razzie in person, saying it was much better than reading the reviews. The film has been critically reappraised. Some now argue it was always intended as dark satire that audiences missed. Berkley has said 1995 was a different time when taking risks like that got you shamed publicly. Verhoeven agrees the failure hurt her far more than it hurt him. Waterworld was the most expensive film ever made. The production cost $175 million. Marketing added another $60 million. Total cost, $235 million. The media dubbed it Fish Tar and Kevin's Gate before anyone had seen a frame. It made $264 million worldwide. That sounds profitable until you realize studios typically need 2.5 times the production budget to break even. Waterworld needed close to $500 million. It didn't get there. Director Kevin Reynolds quit before release after constant battles with Costner. Sets were destroyed by weather. A major floating set sank completely. Costner reportedly put $22 million of his own money into the production. Steven Spielberg had warned him about filming on the ocean, citing his own nightmare-making Jaws. But here's the twist. Waterworld eventually turned profitable through home video and TV rights. And the theme park attraction, Waterworld, a live SeaWar spectacular, opened in October 1995 and is still running at 4 Universal parks today. It's the oldest attraction at Universal Studios Hollywood besides the studio tour. 1995 proved something important. A film's theatrical performance doesn't determine its ultimate significance. Showgirls won 7 Razzies but made $100 million on video. Mallrats made $2 million but launched Kevin Smith's cult empire. Assassins was reviled, but its failure created The Matrix. These 15 films lost over $500 million combined. Studios panicked, budgets briefly stabilized. Then everyone forgot the lessons and started spending even more. Sometimes the biggest disasters become the most interesting stories to tell.